Today we will talk about wipe coding and prototyping. And the organizers not even said, no, Christopher, please don't call it wipe coding because we are at the Academy of Sciences and wipe coding sounds like something that should not be part of the Academy of Sciences, but none of the organizers said this. So we have a very provocative title and we will really focus on this topic. Yeah, so we will talk about how we can work with large language models, how we can use them in creating code and with all its limitations and problems, and also possibilities, because people who are not that good in coding can now do new stuff, but there are just a lot of new problems connected to this, yeah? And as we want to try to be the best, the best understood or documented or whatever, we will try this like, let's call it informed wipe coding perspective. So what are the limitations and stuff like that? And I developed a context engineering, I'm not sure if it is a method already, let's say a way you can work in wipe coding that is called prototyping. Yeah, that's a context engineering method that can help you to work with more complex tasks, yeah? And the subtitle of this lecture is Asymmetric Amplification, why AI does not automate research, but disruptively amplifies computer-based research. And that would be like the overstretching arch over the whole workshop today, or the whole session today, because in my opinion, we are in times of like extreme technical development. I would call it like a true revolution, but it is a very asymmetric development because people like me who have like the experience and like the investment in AI can amplify their work much more than other people's, yeah? And this is a very big problem for our society. And I will come to this aspect in more detail a bit later. But first, let me introduce myself. So I worked at the Center for Information Modeling. Now it is called Institute for Digital Humanities at the University of Graz. I did my master's in history and European, also Euromax, European Media, Arts and Cultural Heritage Studies. That is like already outdated joint degree master course I did. So I always worked in the intersection of cultural heritage institutions and how we can use digital methods to support research in that domains. Yeah? And last year I finished my PhD in digital humanities. From this perspective, we have a lot of experience in working in workflows and with data in the context of digital humanities research. Yeah? So my focus and my examples will more focused on like humanities data and cultural heritage data, of course. Yeah? And because we have a broken academic system in Austria, somebody like me cannot be permanently employed. You will hear a lot of political statements from me. So cannot be permanently employed at the university because just, you know how it works. So we founded our own company where we just do the same. Yeah, just as like really much the same. Yeah, which is very nice. And we are offering like these IT services to work together in projects like as the IT partner for different stuff. Yeah. And in this context, we of course put an emphasis on how to work with generative AI, with large language models in like very different perspectives of the whole life cycle of a project. So this is like one of our main topics now. So prompt engineering, context engineering, AI engineering, and stuff like that. And I'm also doing a lot of other stuff of trying to inform people, in training people. We did it like a lot of different workshops now at different institutions in Europe. And I have a lot of resources you can also use for that, to just get into the topic more deeply. And this is also like the foundation of everything I'm telling you, yeah? So I'm a convener of a working group of the DHD, which is like the German-speaking community of digital humanities, where we have regular webinars where colleagues are presenting their work about how to use large language models or generative AI in digital humanities research. So this could be a very interesting perspective to see, what are other people doing in that domain? Then I'm curating a YouTube playlist. That sounds a bit weird, doesn't it? But that's the main information source. So what I could recommend you is to just follow this YouTube playlist, and you just need to read the headings. You don't need to watch all the videos, but this just shows you what is like happening at the moment in the AI bubble is maybe too strong, but in a curated AI bubble, so let's say, yeah? So this is also some way to stay updated. On the academic version of it is like a Zotero library where I'm curating all the papers and literature I'm finding. It is highly focused on how to use this technology in research with digital humanities focus. Again, it's just the research I'm using, but there is more general stuff in it. So this could also be very interesting to just have a starting point of literature. And of course, maybe there's a paper that is not that good because it's just collecting and curating and trying to be not too overwhelmed by all these development. Yeah? And I also can recommend there's some teaching material I used in a summer school in September with also lecture notes, some videos, some slides. It's from September 2025, so it is already becoming a bit outdated. That's the problem of the technology. But I also added this glossary. Will I just show to you live? Because that is maybe quite interesting or helpful, hopefully, because I'm curating like a lot of terms and I try to define them and I add some resources to it, like a paper or video to give some grounding to these definitions. That doesn't mean that all of these definitions are perfectly and highly curated, but maybe it gives you like a possibility to check, okay, there is a term like agentic coding tool. What does it mean? What is the difference between an AI agent or an agentic agent, for example? Yeah? So it's just a curated list of terms that I made available on this website. And you already see that I built a full website with it, which I wipe coded like on an afternoon. Yeah, it's no problem to put some content on the web in a already, I would say, okayish looking interface. Yeah. Yeah. So that's everything like the material you can have a look into. For the session, we have the slide deck, and there's also a lecture note about all the content we are talking about this session. And you can already look it up at the Indigo, yeah? So you can have access to the slides there. And the lecture manuscript is, just to give you an idea, is something that you can read afterwards. It's highly AI created and also but curated by me. And you can really use it as something to scroll through. And when there are the hands-on exercises, there should be all the information for you how to achieve the hands-on exercise. Yeah? And you could also make some comments if you find something weird or you have a question, because afterwards I will just grab all that information and write the full manuscript. So then you have something to read or something that you can take and put into a large language model if you just want to process it. Yeah? For that, just always copy the Markdown, because there's more, we will talk about that, there's more information encoded in a Markdown document than just in a plain text document. And never use PDF, yeah? I should really prepare the talk, like talking about why PDF is the worst format ever. So, but that's maybe another winter school. Okay, so this is about the material. And okay, today we will talk about what large language models are, like not on the technical perspective you were hearing it yesterday, but we will maybe try it, okay, how is all of that connected to prompt engineering and context engineering and this applied approach? So what do we really need to know when we are working with the systems, yeah? Like what is a context window and stuff like that, yeah? And we will talk about tools, so what tools can you use, which are problematic, which are maybe better to use for which domain, stuff like that. We'll talk about prompt and context engineering as like the way of working with a large language models on two, let's say, different levels. And the main aspect is focusing on how to create code and how to further develop it using a large language model. Yeah, and showing you some techniques that help you to achieve more complex problems with that. Yeah, but there's of course always a limitation. You cannot do everything with it, of course. Yeah, and maybe, if there's some time left, we will also talk about AI agents, because in this year, and maybe you saw the ZIP2 interview yesterday with Peter Steinberger, who invented OpenClaw. Somebody saw that? Yeah? But you know Peter Steinberger, who developed this OpenClaw. So he's from Upper Austria, and now he's a member of OpenAI. So he produced an open source tool, and he told everybody, hey, cool, here's my open source tool. And then he went to OpenAI, and I got maybe some millions of dollars, and he can now work there. And now the open source tool is, I would say, dead. Yeah? But it's very interesting that we have a very big shift from this chat paradigm to like these AI agents, yeah? And that is not a completely new paradigm, but it makes the systems much more powerful. Yeah, you can do much more with it. Yeah, and then there is like the question: okay, if there is something like vibe coding, you can like do some stuff with LLMs, developing some software. Could there be, and that's very provocative, could there be something like vibe research, so that you are vibe researching something, exploring the solution space of a large language model, and come to something that really perfectly fits to your paper or to your research? Yeah. I don't know, but at least all the main AI labs are only focusing on that, yeah, on how to automate research. And of course, we have like this branch of critical, constructive reflection on the whole topic. Yeah, just because we can do something does not mean we should do it. Yeah, there is a lot of ethical and ecological aspects and social aspects that is highly connected to this topic, and we cannot talk about everything, but just want to open that at any time you can say, I don't like that. I think that is very stupid, and I'm already very angry about it. Yeah, because that's absolutely okay. And I'm also very angry about some stuff. Yeah, that's about some political statements I will maybe just throw into the room. So all what I tell you somehow came out of existence during my PhD thesis, when I was working on how to model and set up workflows and operationalize historical information. So I was working with historical financial documents and how to create digital editions out of it, and I had to transfer this information from like text to TI-XML and to RDF, so to structured data then that can be used and explored on a web user interface. So that was my PhD thesis. And in like when GPT-4 was published in 2023, I guess, or in April or something like that, I cannot remember, then I was just trying out different stuff. Yeah, I was just trying out, can such a model create a TI-XML? And it was like, yes, it did it somehow, it was okay. It was, of course, not valid TI. It made a lot of errors. It hallucinates a lot, yeah? But I also was learning, and I was watching the YouTube channel AI Explained. Who knows this YouTube channel? Nobody. You really should, when you're at home, go on YouTube and watch like all videos from Philip from AI Explained, because he's like the super nerd who reads just all the literature and curates like a 20 to 30 minutes video out of it, yeah? And all this information and knowledge is somehow available as YouTube videos. But he was arguing or telling me or telling people that there are some scaling laws, and that these models, what they can do now, like in April 2023, that this will just improve, yeah? Because the models and the scaling laws exist. We will talk about that later. And the models, when you see that they can do something, you can put more optimization, more data into it, more reinforcement learning, and you can improve it, yeah? And if you already see it for complex tasks, that these systems can, like, it's getting there, yeah? Then the possibility is high that at some point it can be very good in that task, yeah? Okay, and I was like trying out all the stuff, and I was just seeing that my whole PhD was like, that doesn't make sense anymore. I don't have to think about a dashboard where there are different researchers working with historical documents. Like there are social historians who want to know how, which people ate potatoes, for example, and which people ate drink beer, for example, and the economic historians wanted to know, okay, how develop the price of potatoes. So maybe they needed just different tools for exploring the historical sources, different interfaces for the digital editions. And my original idea of my PhD thesis was, okay, I will generate this generic dashboard, like I have use cases and they can explore the data, but nobody will be very happy with it, yeah? And then I started wipe coding before it was cool. I did it already in December or like autumn 2024, before Andrew Karpathy coined this term. And I did something like this. It's like an interface of a network representing all the trading between people, or people buying stuff, people buying some lumber or timber or some potatoes, stuff like that. And I created this like in 2 days using, I think, O1, so one of the first reasoning models, as a static website, yeah? And this was like a moment where I thought, we will not create interfaces for researcher because we have technology that will create the interfaces depending on their context, on their research question, yeah? And because there is a structured research data, which is very important. If you have structured research data where there is already context expressed in some way, and you have some research domain and context, you can just throw this together into a large language model and create some new applications out of it, yeah? And this is was like the idea of developing, okay, can we further develop this as some kind of a method? And this is when I developed this promptotyping method, this like informed wipe coding stuff, yeah? So what is wipe coding? This was introduced by Andrew Karpathy, who is one of the former founders of OpenAI. I'm not sure if he is a founder or he just worked there for a couple of years, but he left OpenAI, and he was saying there is a new kind of coding I call wipe coding, where you fully give in the wipes, embrace exponentials, and forget the code even exists, yeah? So this was the idea of, you're not really coding anymore, you just do whatever the LLM gives you, yeah? Which is very different to structured software development. And it is never ever replacing software development, because you have to think about security and architecture, and you have a backend, and it's just more complex. But for some domains and some problems, for a script to transform some data, for a script to create a visualization, for your small research tool that is running in your browser to do some data annotation or annotating some images, why not? Because you are in charge of just checking everything, or at least pay somebody doing the review of the code you have, yeah? So this really gives you new possibilities as a researcher, and not waiting at the Uni IT to give you some tools and then you have no admin rights to install something on your laptop. Now you can just create some of these tools which are highly customized what you really need, yeah? And this is like a completely new paradigm, yeah? And this is also doable if you never learned programming so far. But I would highly recommend to visit the next Python course, yeah? Or you organize a Python course at your institution, because the more you know about how to program and software development, it is easier to follow what the agents, the large language models or the AI agents are doing, and you have a better vocabulary to communicate with these systems, yeah? It's much more effective to talk, I want a single page application with vanilla JavaScript, yeah? Then it's very clear what the specifications of your tool are, yeah? If you just say, create a web page, then there's a lot of ways how to create a web page. So this was one of the first real prototypes I developed with this promptotyping method. I will just show you what I did 2 weeks ago. I invested 3 days into this application, which I call Co-OCR HTR, which should be an editor-in-the-loop web interface. It's a single page application, a static page that can run locally in your browser or on a web page, which allows you to upload some documents. You can also load some IIIF images into the image. So IIIF is like an API where you can load this kind of information into a system, yeah? I did not came up with this. Claude Code at some point said, hey, wouldn't IIIF be very cool to import that? And I said, yes. And then it was implemented and it worked, and I can just check it if it's working, yeah, because I see the result here, yeah. And the idea is that you can upload some documents and you can create some OCR using different models. Something like, you can use something like a Gemini model, which are Google models. The Gemini models are very good in visual information because they are the strongest model in multimodal tasks, yeah? And you have, for example, the Flash model, which is the small version, which is cheaper. You always pay for tokens, like we will talk about that later. And you have like the Pro model, which is the smarter one, but also more expensive one. And they are very good in visual tasks, yeah? And they're getting better and better. Why? Because Google has the most video information and image information, and they're very good in pre-training their models, yeah? We'll also talk about that, yeah? We could also use some other models, like an OpenAI model or something else. And it's also that way that if you have some OCR task, for the manuscript we just saw, we would need some HDR, some handwritten text recognition, which is a more complex task, but OCR is just from a PDF, for example, extract the text from the image source and give me the text out of it. You could also use your local DeepSeek OCR model, yeah? So DeepSeek published OCR model a couple of weeks ago, OCR2, which is extremely good in OCR, and it's running on my gaming computer at home, yeah? Okay, the computer is frozen and I cannot do anything with it, and it's very loud because the GPU is working, but I can really do high quality OCR locally with this tool, yeah? I cannot show it live because this is not my gaming machine, of course. Yeah, but it was very easy to implement this. So I just had the ideas. So I know there is a DeepSeek OCR. I give Claude like here's the documentation, how to implement it. Do it, yeah? And then I'm just the expert in the loop checking if my requirements are fulfilled. Here you see, I already prepared this because it takes a bit of time, of course, because you're sending the image information to a server in the United States. Again, this is a big problem. Always, when you're working with these proprietarian US-American models, then something is stored at some American server, yeah? So that's a big problem, and if you if that's sensible information, if that's information that you don't want to share to the US government, so to say, then you have to be very careful. In this case, this is a medieval text. I see no problem with that, and I asked that I can do it. And what you see is, of course, not a perfect transcription of this. Yeah, it's very out of the box of Gemini Flash, but that the model is even capable of doing that is very interesting, because there was never ever at Google somebody who was thinking, we really have to train the models on transcribing German medieval text, yeah? Because I would call it like this is a weak emergent capability of scaling up the multimodal capabilities, yeah? And we will see, I'm pretty sure that the Gemini 4 will be much better in this task, yeah? And it will be much cheaper. And you already see that the structure is already quite nice. So provision und solde, is some expert here who could read this perfectly? Yeah, I had my pro seminar in history, but it's a long time ago. But it looks okay. Außerhalb Landes is correct. There are two N's. Then you see that it really gives you like the title and the subtitle. Sigmund von Brandes, that is not an M in the middle. I think there are two N. Yeah, but it's okay. And you really see that it also was able to identify like the paragraphs and stuff like that, yeah? So if you are, for example, working with Transkribus, like this transcription would be better because you can prepare and train the Transkribus model on that specific handwriting, of course. But it would be more expensive, I guess, because this is very cheap with Gemini Flash. And you could also get the better version with just switching to the Pro model. Yeah?
Could you say how much it would cost, for example?
1 cent, or let's say 5 cents for 1 page. I wrote it down somewhere, yeah? Okay, but of course there is always a problem. And we always have a large language model, which is a black box by, let's say, definition, yeah? And it's like Schrödinger's Katze, yeah? maybe this text is hallucinated as an output of a large language model, but it could also be right. Maybe it's some, I know that's not really the best metaphor, but maybe just think of it. And you need some way of validating it. So you need somebody checking if all of this transcription is correct. And you could think of it like there's a task from a large language model, you always need some verification step, yeah? And the easiest verification step would be to have some student assistant checking if that is correct. No, just kidding, but this is a working workflow that really makes sense. But maybe you could also be the expert in the loop, or maybe you're not in the loop because you want to build a workflow around you, amplifying your work, supporting your work, and you have something to just correct it now. Let's say we want to remove this here. I can just correct it because that is an editor, yeah? And I was just thinking of how would an editor interview work to just correct it, and then I can export it in different formats again, yeah? So I could work in a system like Transkribus, put all this information into this tool, do some corrections, do not only corrections in the sense of manual corrections, but also think of a workflow of you have some rule-based validation, just some code that helps you to validate something. For example, the number of lines, stuff like that. It's a research preview. Maybe that not really makes sense. But you also can have some kind of AI assistance. So there is a second API call. Here's the image, and here is the transcribed text. Gemini, check it, and what can be wrong, yeah? And this, let the model a second time try to work on your material is like, you always have to do that, yeah? That is a prompting strategy, a context engineering strategy that models, it's called self-verification, are much better in looking back at existing tokens, comparing something, processing something, and they are more likely to success in that task, yeah? So you really want to have multiple iterations, yeah? And this could be one of these iterations of just having like like something as an LLM as a judge of, supporting your task. But again, you are the expert and you are just verifying. We don't want to the full workflow be done by a machine, yeah? We somehow need to validate it, yeah? And then I was just trying it with different materials. Here is an Arabic text where I cannot be the expert in the loop because I cannot read it. But it was very easy for me to just now use it with a different text version, yeah? And maybe this whole prototyping process is not about really the tool, but about, for me to learn something about the problem of having workflows and having some tools to work with some, real situations, yeah? And when I'm talking about prototyping, then while I'm working on the tool, I like compressed and distilled all the knowledge I had into Markdown documents, yeah? Like there is information about, it's not working. It's a research prototype, of course. But there is like a lot of Markdown documents that can be represented. And I'm pretty sure you could copy paste all these Markdown documents, throw it into a frontier model, and you can reproduce the tool, yeah? It will look different. Not maybe, I'm pretty sure it is something different, but it is one tool in the solution space of tools of this type, yeah? And we will do that today. Okay, any questions about that? Yeah? So it's not about only making fancy web pages. It's really about how can we develop small research tools, small research artifacts that can support us in our workflows when we are working with large language models or without large language models. So that's the main idea behind it. And the second is to explore the solution space of how to solve something. Yeah? And if you have some GitHub repository and some code, you have something to verify and to test. Yeah? And you always want to verify and test something because otherwise you are in this Schrödinger's Katze, hallucinated, not hallucinated world. Yeah? Okay, so maybe you read this post. Who read it? Something big is happening? Nobody. It's a blog post by Matt Shumner, who is like just articulating his feeling about what is happening at the moment, because there are some big changes since December. So when everybody was going into the winter break, People like me were just, no, now I have time to do some work with the large language models. And that's not healthy. Yeah, that's really not healthy because it's very exhausting because you have all these ideas and now you can just do stuff like, I just had an idea, was like, okay, why not developing this tool? And I have 3 other tools like this in the pipeline, yeah? And that's not a healthy development because now you can do everything. But reading this is much more connected to this because this asymmetric amplification is extremely strong. And the models, like this Opus 4.5 from the company Anthropic, highly specialized on coding tasks, and OpenAI with GPT 5.3 codecs they want to automate programming, yeah, and also software developing. We are not sure if this is even possible because software developing is much more than just creating code, but at least they are trying it, yeah? And you see it here from Jakub Pachoggi, that's the OpenAI's chief scientist. The big goal that we are working towards is automating research, yeah? So all the customers, all the enterprises, the big labs, Google, Anthropic, OpenAI, and xAI, these are like the leading American companies, they are not interested in customers. This is just one way to achieve the strategic goal of automating research. Why? Because if you are automating, and we have to be very careful in what this really means, they are focusing on coding and machine learning to improve the next generation of AI systems. Yeah? They want to kick off this, what is called singularity, if that is even possible. Yeah? We don't know. But on this way of optimizing on coding, mathematics, machine learning, they really want to create the next architecture. Yeah? And they, in my opinion, everything I learn is much more on, we are much more on the side that they will do it in some way. Yeah? And this is very problematic because somebody who started a software company 3 years ago, Digital Humanities Craft, which is focusing on data transformation, web interfaces, is just seeing that the business idea is can be just eaten by the big tech companies, yeah? On their way on doing this optimization. And we will see this in the next and 2028 if that really works. And I know this sounds like very science fiction, but this is much closer to the reality as saying, okay, this is just some people writing some posts on LinkedIn and doing some hype. No, I think that there is a very strong argumentation you can build around this. So that is really true. Okay, the ArcBench is, so we have these benchmarks. Benchmarks mean that you define a lot of different use cases and tests, and you want a large language model or an AI system to be more broadly, because you are benchmarking AI systems, you want to test it, yeah? For example, we could develop a benchmark if a model is very good in OCR, for example, or in data analysis. And this benchmark, created by François Chollet, it's a French AI expert researcher, is focusing on tasks that large language model cannot do, yeah? So the first large language models in ArcAGI 1 were absolutely failing because these are tasks where a system needs really to generalize, to have some true abstractions, yeah? There are problems the system never saw in the training data, and the model really has to generalize to solve this problem, yeah? And the argumentation from this fluid intelligent, like the ability to acquire skills at novel tasks from minimal experience, was something François Chollet built, and he also wrote a paper in 2029 about how to measure on the measure of intelligence, which is a very, very, very good paper. He really wanted to build a benchmark that cannot be solved and cannot be benchmarked, so to say, yeah? And now we see that the second version of it, the ArcAGI 2, is already saturated by Gemini 3 DeepThink. This should not be happen now, yeah? Maybe in 2 years, something like that. So, of course, the companies are highly benchmarking. That means they are really focusing on, okay, we have to, if we get a higher value there, then we have more media talking about us, yeah? But it's not that they are then worse on another benchmark. They are doing benchmark maxing in all benchmarks, which means there is something, maybe it's not true generalization, but the models are becoming better, like in all tasks that are benchmarked. And if somebody builds a new benchmark, then you have something to optimize again. And I think that's like really this brute force way of, okay, let's like benchmark in all domains. And that's also the reason why they are building these gigantic data centers in the United States. They are investing $2 trillion of dollars until 2030 to only build the infrastructure for data centers and electricity. This is some kind of Manhattan Project. And there is no European infrastructure that compete with it. There's only a Chinese infrastructure and data center build out. So this is like a very interesting benchmark to follow this because it is some kind of compass to very strong AI systems. There's another benchmark, and all these benchmarks, of course, are not like this is just one small puzzle piece in a bigger picture. The other is like this meters study, which is both are not, they are working together with the tech labs, but they are independent organizations with real researchers behind it. So François Chollet is a very trustworthy guy, in my opinion. And so also the METER organization is also some independent organization. And you see the curve of how good are models in working on tasks for some time and achieve 50% of all these tasks. Yeah, and you see that like a GPT-3 was like not even maybe working a minute for doing something and then failed, something like that. And you really see that kind of exponential curve of models are capable of longer working autonomously on a task and have a 50% chance of solving that task. But again, this is only focusing on coding tasks and like software tasks. Some specialized tasks you can do on a computer, not for all tasks. But this is also something that nobody was really expecting, that this is like extremely improving. And we're not even seeing the real frontier models because Claude Opus 4.5 is the last version, and now it's much better. Yeah, and so is GPT 5.3. Here we have GPT 5.2. And this is already like the model can work, let's say, about 6 hours on a task, and there's a 50% chance of solving that coding task, for example. So again, this is not showing like real-world tasks because benchmarking that's the only way to evaluate how the models are developing, but there's nothing else. You can also, your own experience working with the technology and some benchmarks like this. So in my opinion, we are really on this continuum of that code generation will be done by machines, 100%, yeah? In 1 year, we will have local models, open source models that will be as good as the models of today in coding. That means that there should be some infrastructure already prepared at the academy that you can have access. Don't give all the data to some big US tech oligarchs. Maybe just keep everything in-house. Today, it's still too expensive, but it is doable with Chinese models. And the question is how far this will go, yeah? Everything that is done on a computer, in theory, can be optimized. You just need enough training data and the environments to do so, yeah? And this development is, in my opinion, extremely asymmetric because if you are just a teacher and you really, like, you have this crowd of students using some frontier models, doing the homework and preparing stuff, and you just also have to answer to that, to be on the same level, I would say. Or in politics, if there are some fascists on the one side using AI very strongly to attack democracy, maybe we need some other good guys defending democracy, yeah? So you see on so many levels, it again was a political statement, we see some asymmetric development of cybersecurity. Yeah, nobody's talking about cybersecurity. There was already a very big hacker attack using Claude Code from North Korea to the United States, yeah, where they have like this big scaled AI cyber attacks with these coding systems. Because when models are getting better in coding and getting better and better, they are getting better in cyber attacks. And the only way to defend against such attacks is by using AI. Which is, by the way, a wonderful business model for the AI companies, I guess. Yeah, but it's about money, it's about resources, and it's about knowledge. Yeah, and we have to somehow handle this. Okay, this was already a bit dystopian, and I cannot wash away this dystopian talk because I think we are much more developing in this field, but it's like on us to change this because knowing more about stuff and communicating into the society is, I think, very needed. And therefore, everybody just needs to know more. Yeah, that's the reason why we are here. And that's the reason why we'll now start with the first hands-on exercise. And in this exercise, it's like really the first try to just check the setup. Yeah, you will use a large language model to generate some code, and you will execute it. There's a CSV file that you can use. You can also work with your own data if it's easy for you to achieve. Be aware, uploading your data to Google Colab to a large language model means that this is somewhere at an American server. So you just be careful about that. Yes. And I think it's very clear structured what to do now. You can also use the lecture notes where you have information. Okay, so I prepared some data. As I said, you can use also your own data. It's in hands-on generate Python code and with a large language model. And you just download it. It's a very small CSV file, which means you can easily get an idea what the data is about. I will use now this Visual Studio Code as an editor to just show it to you. That's just an open editor that is created by Microsoft. It's not an open source product, but it's open and it's free and you can download it. Okay, and this data is about some IDs, some title. So it's from the Crime Museum from Graz. So you have a rather weird collection of some skull stuff, some weapons, some projectiles and plans and stuff like that, yeah? And we have some types, dates, material, and some description information, yeah? And what we now want to do is we want to create some Python code to do something with it, yeah? It's not really sophisticated now, but we will build on that in the next hands-on exercise. So I just downloaded it, and I opened, I will work with Claude. So you have academic AI to use, and everybody who's not at the academy is just using the large language model he's using. But I will show it with like the frontier model now. But from the process, it should be the same. And what we are doing is uploading this file, yeah? And then you can just copy-paste this prompt. I will say something about it, which is something like the following. Analyze the file step by step. So step by step is activating what is called chain of thought prompting. Yeah? So there is a way of prompting a large language model that activates regions in the model that do something of, there's a big problem, and let's break this bigger problem into some subtasks. Yeah? And that creates more tokens, more text, and does something that we could call reasoning. Yeah? It's not really reasoning, but it's something that simulates the process. Yeah? If you're using a reasoning model, you're not writing step by step. Yeah? Because a reasoning model is already doing this way of creating tokens to simulate some thinking. And it is different in different providers. For example, you have this GPT-5 Instant, which is a non-reasoning model, and you have this GPT-5 Thinking, which is a reasoning model. Yeah? Or Gemini Pro is a reasoning model. Yeah? Claude 4.6 is a non-reasoning model. What is the distinction between a non-reasoning model and a reasoning model? It is that it creates, and I show it here to you, and Claude models are this hybrid version. It does this part here. It is creating some tokens before, yeah? And what they did is they discovered that chain of thought, let's think step by step, improves the capabilities in the model, yeah, for different tasks. We could also think of this as some kind of weak emergent capability. Nobody was aware that let's think step by step makes the models better. But then they used this way, and like in post-training, they adapted the model and changed it in a way that it always creates some path of solutions. And if you can also scale it up, yeah? That's called test time compute. You can give a model more compute, more graphic cards, so to say, and it allows it to create more of these paths. Yeah, we'll talk about this a bit later. Yeah, but like something was discovered and was trained into the models again. Yeah, please.
You told that for this reasoning model, this step by step is not useful. But if you are not sure, if we write step by step reasoning
always happens something, and I'm pretty sure that the newest models can be much better in handling this. So when the reasoning models came up, there was really in the documentation of all the providers, don't use step by step, because something that was called overthinking happened. Yeah, the model was thinking too much. And if I use some words like thinking, then always with quotations, yeah? Maybe this is not the problem so anymore. So we are always talking about these small puzzles, yeah? Maybe step by step, using is maybe not so problematic, yeah? But this is just the best way to do it, yeah? This is very important. Large language models are per definition non-deterministic, and they write Python code, and they can also execute that Python code in their environment. And what we then do is, you take this Python code, and we also see that some environments give you an environment where the code is already executed. That means in Claude, this is called artifacts, which is like an editor-like environment. And you have here the chat, and maybe on the right side or on the left side, or I don't know, at some side, there is like a Jupyter notebook, and the large language model has something that is called tool use. It uses something like a Jupyter notebook, writes the Python code into it, it can communicate via an API, executes it, and brings the output of the code back into the context window, yeah? And this is very important to know, that large language models can use different tools, a web search, a terminal, artifacts, a code interpreter, and stuff like that, yeah? But most of the time, you don't want to give all the data to Anthropic in this case. Maybe you just want to have a snippet or some synthetic data to create the Python script, and then you want to work in your local environment, for example, yeah, with your original data. And if you're using the Colab, then I would ask you to just copy it, so that you have your own Colab environment, and you have to upload the file. So it's a very simple hands-on exercise. It just shows you that you can create code. If you get an error message, and that's also part of the hands-on, then you just copy-paste the error message back into the system. And you also tell the system if you're using Visual Studio Code on your local machine, or if you're using Colab in Google. And you could also think of, I don't want to talk and write to it. You could also make a screenshot of this environment and copy it, paste it back to Claude. Because the screenshot, help me just very easily, yeah? So all the models are multimodal models that they can work with screenshots, stuff like that, which really helps you to be faster. And maybe you saw also different ways, depending on the system you use, that you put all the information into the context window of a model, and it was able to analyze it, and maybe gave you just a description of the text, or it was already also executing the code on the other side. Yeah? So we have different tools with different functionalities. So we saw it in Claude, with Claude Opus 4.6, that it opened this artifact environment where it was able to execute the code, and all the stuff was built into the chat interface. And I think tool use in that way, that code execution, I think there is a code interpreter built in Academic AI, but yeah. So different systems have different environments, yeah, and you also have to be aware of that, yeah. And the code interpreter is it called when this functionality is something that you're using with OpenAI's product, yeah? And then models are very different in their capabilities. As we already said, that depending on the models, if you're using a GPT-5 Mini or Nano, which is a small model, maybe that is very fastly overwhelmed, let's say, by a specific task. So you have different sizes of models. Let's just check it for example, Claude and Anthropic. You have like the Opus 4.6, which is the big model, which is the smarter model, but which also needs more computation and more you compute. And if you have a pro subscription, then you have a limited amount of requests for Opus 4.6, yeah? So you are paying for the bigger model, so to say. Then the Sonnet 4.5 is like the mid-tier model. It is smaller, it is cheaper, it is faster, but it's not so smart like Opus 4.6. So it's a big difference. You really want to use Opus 4.6 for doing some planning, yeah, for complex tasks, because you need more intelligence, so to say. But the Sonnet 4.5 is also very good in like writing code, yeah? So plan the architecture with the big model. You can do that always. But if you have like limited resources, you can give it to a smaller model. Here's the plan, and just implement it, yeah? And there's the Haiku model, which is the cheapest model, which is also the fastest model, yeah? Depending on different tasks, you need different models. Yeah, and you have like this family of models in all providers, like you have here the thinking model, where you can change how much compute is used in thinking mode, which means this is test time compute. There are just like more tokens generated, the model has more time to think about a task, but you don't want the model to think for simple tasks longer because they can fail. Yeah, you really need to have a feeling, and I think that's the correctest we can say about it, just a feeling about the complexity of a problem, and sometimes you really need the big model. We're in a strong thinking mode, strong reasoning model, and for other tasks like creative writing, you need a non-reasoning model. Yeah, so really there's like a typology of different problems, and you need different models for different problems. Yeah. Yeah, so models are different, and you always need to know which model you're using. Yeah, if somebody is telling you, I worked with ChatGPT, I worked with ChatGPT and it didn't work, or it worked, then it's very important to, okay, which model in ChatGPT, which subscription, because it's very, very different. And that's the reason I ask you, do you know what the context window is? And I'm asking this now at every workshop, and there are, I would say, only 5 to 10% raising their hand, because that's like the most important stuff to know about interacting with a large language model, that there is a context window, yeah? And now we will absolutely talk about this, yeah? Yeah, please.
But for the, for example, for the pro version of ChatGPT, there is some kind of history, you can enable that?
Yes, exactly.
And this is kind of the memory which you...
Exactly, yeah? Yeah.
Whenever I work with ChatGPT,
yeah.
And I get, when you for coding or give me an idea how I could model this or that, it gives me an example and then tells me, do you want an example for your specific topic, which is a historic newspaper in my case?
Yeah.
So it knows, kind of knows that I'm working on this, and every example that it gives is somehow related to my project, because it knows, okay, unless I'm asking it a random stupid question, it will be related to my project.
Yeah.
I already set it up as a project.
Yeah, but memory is much more of a tool use functionality. So you have like this memory, which is like some text is stored somewhere, and at some point in your conversation, the model triggers something behind the scene and goes to your memory, brings this text or parts of this text into the conversation, and then for me, it is always starting with, that really fits to your prototyping methodology, for example, and most of the time this works. So one strategy would be to just switch off the memory when you're working in different domains, because when you're cooking something, you don't want to start the model talking about prototyping, because then you're just wasting tokens, so to say. But you could also if you really want to get the best out of it, you really need to think about what is a very good memory base that supports my work.
And how about organizing the work in different projects? So if I want to work on my newspaper, I create a project with the newspaper group, and in another project,
yes,
I'm having all the questions about cooking. Would that work, or would that influence?
No. So we have like this memory functionality, which is global, which can be from every conversation be addressed. And you have like these projects or custom GPTs or whatever this is called, where I'm not really using it, but you can define like also some prompts and some material that is just put into the context window, and then you have another starting point. So yes, that's a way of separating the cooking world with the newspaper world, so to say. And just what I want to tell you is that on the memory level, you maybe don't want to activate cooking and a newspaper. Maybe you just want to tell the model, let's work neutral and professional, like in a more generic way. Yeah, that's how I organize my memory functionality. So it's, and also the custom instruction, stuff like that. But we will talk about this later. This is context engineering.
Just a brief comment. Interesting, when I upload the data, the interaction starts in English and ends in German. So the prompt is in English and the start of the interaction is in English.
Yeah.
Consumes the data and the script and the rest of the dialogue is in German.
Yeah.
So this distinction between data and program is kind of complicated, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, of course, data is part of the prompt. Yeah, it is part of the context window. And if there is different, you have 3 different languages in a prompt, the possibility that the model will start writing now German or English is possible. Yeah, you can give a frontier model a strong instruction in only write in English, for example. Yeah, but yes, this can be fluent. But for the frontier model, this does not make any difference anymore. You can just mix languages because the model have a more abstract, more general representation of language and concepts and are translating inside the neural network, so to say. Yeah, there's a very interesting blog post on the biology of LLMs from Anthropic, which is doing the following. They are doing something like neuroscientists, like looking at the neurons. Very simplified, of course, what I'm telling you. And they see different areas in the model that are activated. And they have identified something like multilingual circuits. That means there are regions in the model that have something to do with generalizing language. So there's a concept of programming represented in a model, and then there are regions to translate this into French and stuff like that. Yeah? So this could also be something of a weak emergent capability that appears in a large language model that is trained with so many language data. So I personally really mix German and English all the time, and most of the time now I prompt in German. Yeah? 1.5 years ago I would have told you always prompt in English because there's more training data and it's just you get better results. But this is not the case with the frontier models anymore, I would say. Yeah? They're also very good in understanding Styrian dialect. Yeah? Medieval text. There was a colleague in Cologne who was working with old Persian text and working with Gemini, and she was like, I'm pretty sure that will not work because there is not a lot of training data. No problem for Gemini. In context, there's something that's called in context learning. If you have enough examples of a language, Gemini is getting really good in understanding like this new language. Yeah? The old Persian language is also highly connected to the new Persian, so it's not like completely different, but you see for some languages it's really powerful, maybe for others not so powerful, yeah? But the systems are very good just in language in general, yeah.